I'd like to talk about a magnificently morbid topic today: the end of the human race, the extinction of humans as a species. I'm not talking about circumstances where a lot of people die and there's a few scattered survivors living here and there in the post apocalyptic world, like the Mad Max type blockbusters that Hollywood likes to churn out year after year. I mean, reaching a point of zero humans, zero, nada, zilch, none. So, why am I talking about this strange subject? Well, I always did have an interest in those aforementioned action movies as a kid, often dealing with the zombie apocalypse. But despite the silliness churned out by Hollywood on the subject of the end of the world, there is some truth behind the idea that as our modern society becomes ever more capable of molding the physical world, the fear that we might somehow use these powers to author our own destruction. It is the elephant in the room that we are often reluctant to address head on. So I'd like to do that today, considering three common scenarios that might result in the elimination of all humans in existence: climate change, nuclear war, and superviruses. And I'd like to weave together these scenarios with a common inquiry. Is it even possible for this thing to eliminate all the humans? And possible may be too strong of a word. Anything is possible. Likely is the more appropriate word for this. Now that we know where we want to go with this topic, it's time to set up the framework for what it would take to wipe out all humans, and conversely, what humans would need to overcome in order to beat the odds and survive the hypothetical catastrophe. First, you need a minimum number of humans to reproduce, probably about 100. We know from the study of endangered species that once the number of individuals falls below a certain threshold, typically a dozen or so, the species often goes extinct because the gene pool is too small and fragile. 100 humans is the approximate order of magnitude size of the communities that early humans lived in prior to the rise of cities. So we might infer that this is a workable minimum population that our human species needs to continue. Second, it's necessary that all the humans are able to live in the same geographical area, probably within a 10-mile radius of each other. It's no good if we have 100 humans on the planet, but they're scattered all over the world. Third, the humans need to be able to feed themselves and have enough food. Fourth, I'd suggest that humans need to live at least 30 years beyond whatever the catastrophe is that happens so that they can bring up the next generation. Fifth, the humans should have a path towards geographical expansion and repopulating the Earth. If they don't do this, for instance, if all the humans were confined to a single spaceship in outer space, then the species would be too susceptible to a single disaster to say that humans are going to survive. So ready? Here's my assessment. Climate change, the least likely to result in the elimination of the human species. Civilization, sure, but not the species. And my reason is that I think islands are a great place for humans to survive climate change. Not all islands, many Pacific atolls will go underwater if sea levels rise, but mountainous and volcanic islands will survive. Think of Hawaii, Indonesia, Iceland, the Caribbean nations, even Japan. While the coastal cities of these islands may be devastated by the rising sea levels, they all consist of land that is thousands of feet above present sea level. So even if Greenland and Antarctica completely melt into the sea, there will still be plenty of dry land. People can just keep moving on up. Secondly, these places all have climates that are moderated by ocean temperature. As long as the oceans don't literally start to boil, unlikely, these islands will probably maintain temperatures similar to what they have today, even as the continents roast and suffer calamity and destruction. That means that islands could continue to keep most of their present land species of vegetation and animals, and agriculture could continue. Even if there was a loss of land-based agriculture, Being surrounded by the sea means fishing would be a backup food supply. And finally, since these countries that I named support many millions of humans today, it's likely that they would all meet the requirement for land size and population size, and the ability for humans to repopulate the world would easily be met. Verdict: climate change is unlikely to cause human extinction. Humans 1, disaster scenario 0. Next up, a worldwide nuclear war. This one's a little trickier, but the analysis is simpler. The issue is that building and maintaining nuclear weapons is expensive and humans are cheap. They will always try to get the most damage for the least cost, and they'll accomplish that by ignoring small settlements. If there's a nuclear war, all the major cities of the world are toast, gone. But they're not going to reach out to the tiny populations, the small farming and ranching communities, and bonus points if those communities employ sustainable practices so they can still grow food after modern civilization is destroyed. They won't go after hunter-gatherer tribes living deep in the jungles, remote mountain villages, tiny island fishing communities, and so on. So I believe humans, in the end, will survive nuclear war. Verdict: humans 2, disaster scenarios 0. The third possible cause of the end of humans is supervirus. And this is timely because we just had a pandemic, which gives us some insight into our present tools for survival: quarantine, prevention, and treatment. I'm not going to offer a critique of the pandemic response of the past 2 years, but I will say that we've seen in real time what has worked and what didn't work. And my estimation is that in the case where the world is confronted by a far deadlier virus than COVID-19, and something with the morbidity of almost 100% be required to wipe out humans, communities that chose ineffective responses would be quickly eliminated, Darwin style, and the survivors would slowly be self-selecting the strategies that result in surviving the virus or eliminating it. Therefore, those communities would survive into the future. So my verdict: supervirus, while scary, is unlikely to result in human extinction. Score: humans 3, disaster scenarios 0. Why talk about this stuff? Well, it's interesting to talk about as a morbid curiosity, but it also illustrates to me the ways in which our world and human civilization really is fragile. Even as I could outline ways to find a few people surviving here and 100 people surviving over there, most of my scenarios turn the whole world on its head and wipe out almost everything we've ever known, loved, and cared for. Just because I can find a way for 20,000 people to repopulate the Earth after nuclear war doesn't mean that nuclear war wouldn't be the most tragic, unambiguously tragic event in human history. Just because some humans and their ecosystem remain relatively intact on an island somewhere doesn't mean that turning the rest of the planet into a wasteland isn't an utter catastrophe. So take this message to heart. There are many ways that careless human action can result in unimaginable destruction and suffering, even though we are likely to survive in the end. Back to you, Toastmaster.